And this is a very important occasion, and thank you for asking me to speak. And when we think of genocide, I think back of both visiting with a survivor to Auschwitz and also going to Hiroshima, where I was shown round by a lovely young lady she was 6 at the time, and she spoke without any sense of bitterness. And of course, there are so many victims of the Holocaust, those whose lives are scarred by its horror, all who've suffered in other genocides. And indeed, we think of a vast number of refugees today, and the many places where people live in daily terror. And I thought we perhaps just might have perhaps a minute's silence, because whatever we say cannot really speak to the situation. Thank you. But what I want to say, because in some sense we are aware that we can never fully understand the horrors, I want really to urge you and to urge myself not to give up hope, and to remember that little acts of goodness by individuals can help to change the world. And there's a quotation from the Hasidic rabbi Nachman of Bratslav: "The whole world is a narrow bridge, but the essential thing is never to give up hope." And in different ways, this message of hope is, I think, the message of all religions. And of course, the suffragette movement is an example of how a few dedicated people can achieve lasting peace and change. And indeed, the United Nations Genocide Convention on Genocide was largely a small group of people who really pressed that this should happen, and indeed the same with Holocaust Remembrance Day. And it's okay, I mean, I was thinking back, both Anne Frank's diary and Elie Wiesel's Night, both were rejected on the first occasion they sent them to publishers. So we need, I think, to go on having that confidence that change can happen. And I was very honoured, and thank you, Robin and Margaret, for others, for being invited to the gathering, UFA gathering in Korea of religious leaders. It's a phrase I always feel rather ambiguous about, religious leaders. And I've got a book somewhere of 100 religious leaders, and the editor rightly says none of them would ever thought of themselves as a leader. So, but it seems to be a phrase which gets used, and it renewed my hope. It was right at it happened in November, really at the moment of a real standoff between the USA and North Korea. We got there the day after President Trump had left, though I have to say that his speeches there were somewhat more conciliatory than they often are. And also, I think really all we can do is stand with those who are in danger. And in one sense, our presence and our prayers assures them they're not alone and they're not forgotten. I think that is one of the worst things that can happen to people. They may have real difficulties, but to feel nobody cares. And I think presence of so many friends from around the world was clearly an encouragement to the South Koreans. Now, one of the highlights was to be invited by Mother Moon to the palace. But the main event was a great rally in the World Cup Stadium. And I suppose there was something like 80,000 people, a lot of young people. I've never spoken to such a large number before. My congregations in church tend to be a little bit small. But it was as a last speaker, and I felt by that stage there had been so many speakers, and so I just tried to speak to the young people, and really the message just was to hold on to be true to their vision. But I ended with a prayer for the peace and reunification of Korea, and the Amen, which echoed round the stadium, was very moving. Now, the event, of course, was reported in the South Korean newspapers, which I'm sure are read in the north. And soon after the gathering, there was the first contact for some years between North and South Korea, and plans were made for athletes from both parts of Korea to take part in the Winter Olympics. And of course, the thaw of relations between USA and China years ago began with table tennis matches. So I suppose really we can't know what the effect of our prayers and so on are. But I like a saying of former Archbishop William Temple. When I pray, coincidences happen. When I don't, they don't. So maybe. But I do believe, what we've got to believe, and I believe it is, that change is possible. And indeed, this World Interfaith Harmony Week is an example. In 1993, which marked the centenary of the first World Parliament of Religions, some of us got together with different organisations to try to mark the year as a year of interreligious understanding and cooperation. And I remember 3 or 4 of us going to the United Nations building to meet with the Secretary General and going up in the lift right up to sort of into the sky. Well, he said, he listened, he said, I give you my full support, but I can say nothing. Because of this communist influence, nothing could be said about religion. And then, you see, when King Abdullah suggested this World Interfaith Harmony Week in 2010, the United Nations unanimously adopted it within a month. It can be the only thing they've ever unanimously adopted, I should think. But what I'm trying to get is change happens, and it's often a small number of people who start it. I believe change is possible, and I believe God seeks to effect change through each one of us. In my understanding, God so respects human freedom that it has been given to human beings, but he doesn't overrule the consequences of human decision. Just as a parent may regret the course of action a grown child decides upon, but cannot stop them pursuing it. I mean, I don't think our praying to God means that we can just leave God to sort it out. He needs our help. Or she needs our help. And so 2 people whom we remember at this time, I think, a good example of the powers of individuals to change things for the better. January the 20th, as most of you will know, is observed in the United States as Martin Luther King Day. And he, of course, was a man who had the dream of the day when all God's children, whatever their colour or creed, would join hands and sing together, free at last, thank God Almighty. We are free at last. And surely this is really the dream and the hope of Interfaith Harmony Week. And Martin Luther King, I remember the great privilege of hearing him speak when he was speaking in London years ago. He said, true compassion is more than flinging a coin at a beggar. It comes to see that the edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. Challenging the edifice is costly. It cost Martin Luther King his life. And this is why I think people of faith have to be involved with the powers that be. And it's one of the ways I admire the UPF, that it brings together people of many disciplines, and often people, politicians, ambassadors and others, who need that support and reinforcement that the moral values are to be accepted. And because I believe this, I've always been a member of a political party, though I can't ever remember having voted for a successor of those who seem to use it for their own self-interest so often. But also, I wish there could be some ongoing body of people of faith who have expertise about the particular issues, really trying to move from the generalities to what are the decisions and what's going to be most likely. I mean, I felt it happens we have conferences and people disappear. If there were some small working parties which continued and which could really help to inform the religious leaders who may be the spokesperson but can't have the time to get the detailed knowledge, and therefore so often it's generalities. And I do feel that's something, and even maybe sort of UPF could find more way of continuing the very good work of the conferences. And it doesn't always have to be put together, groups, sort of discussions which happen between a group of 10 or 12 people on the internet and so on. So we can move from, what should happen. I mean, for example, in Syria, and I still don't know what the answer is, should we at one stage have intervened from the West, or should we have accepted what goes on, and which would have caused more trouble? There are all sorts of really difficult questions, and perhaps we need, of those of us of faith, to try to, in a disinterested way, try to grapple with what is involved. And then finally, at the same time, we need, I think, constantly to review and renew our own commitments. And I know how committed all of you are. And I believe that each good thought or action is like a pebble thrown into a pond, and the ripples spread across the world. Like, as they spread across the water, so the ripples spread across. And I think we so often don't know, and just occasionally by chance you meet someone who says they heard something, or that gave them help. So what I say is, let's, again and again, we need to open ourselves afresh to the life-giving spirituality of our own and other religious traditions, and in whatever way in our lives, try to share something of it. I'm sure you know the old Chinese prayer, change the world and begin with me. And it's a prayer I need to keep saying to myself. Thank you.